Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Barak Ravid of Axios and Ambassador James Jeffrey of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars.
Hello, everybody. We got a good preparation of the crowd by Jared Kushner. I'm very happy to be here with Jim Jeffrey. For those of you who do not know him, Jim is the real deal. He's, I think, a real legend of American diplomacy. Was ambassador to Turkey, was ambassador to Iraq, deputy national security advisor in the Bush administration, and one of the real experts in the career foreign service of the US government on the Middle East. And this is exactly what we'll talk about, Jim, in the next few minutes that we have here, about empowerment in the Middle East. If you look at the Middle East, you see that a lot of the problems that we're talking about around the world today, issues like equality, poverty, women's rights, climate change, food security, national security, all of those problems are exacerbated in the Middle East much more than many other countries. And over the years, the UN Development Index showed year after year how the region is left behind on all those issues. And I want to first ask you a sort of a yes-no question. Is this even repairable?
Absolutely. I'm optimistic about this. One thing is, you mentioned the UN Development Program's report, and the famous one was in 2002. It painted a pretty dire picture of the region, the Arab states in the region, on knowledge, on women's issues, and on the overall economy, jobs, and so forth.
Because if to say in one line, when you read this report, yes, it really seemed as if the many countries in the Middle East were still in the Middle Ages.
True, but I will say the report was written by Arab scholars. They were looking at their own societies, and that's very important because it gets to what is so important in everything we're doing here at Concordia and around the world, which is listening to people on the ground. Secondly, since then, there's been some good news and bad news. Here today, we have, as part of Concordia, the holographic Global Women's Health Index. Of the 122 countries surveyed, only one country other than Israel in the Middle East made the top 50%, and that was the United Arab Emirates. Nonetheless, the UN Development Program has cited in the last few years, despite COVID, despite global warming, which is impacting the region twice as much as any other region, as you know, coming from it, nonetheless, it has not slipped back as much as many other regions have. So that's a little cause for hope. The other thing is, the region is impacted not just by the climate crisis, it's impacted by instability and wars. Programs by the UN and other international organizations, donor countries are all important, but what lifts countries up, we've seen again and again, is private investment. And here at Concordia, of course, we have representatives of that sector in abundance. But these people are going to look hard-eyed at what a situation is in a given country. And in the Middle East, there's been too many wars, there's been too much terrorism, there's been too much insecurity for people to want to take long-term risks.
And also very problematic domestic political instability in many countries. Even countries that don't have like external conflicts.
Absolutely, but the more serious one, I think, is the regional situation, because it can lead to, as Saudi Aramco learned several years ago, a major installation being struck. The investment sector, the UN, and frankly, donor countries like the United States have a lot of experience dealing with shaky governments. But a shaky security situation is really scary for anybody who wants to make a long-term investment. So job one, and particularly for the United States, I think, but also our partners and friends in the region and elsewhere, is to ensure that the instability that flows from security problems in the region is kept under control. And I'm optimistic that we will see this.
I think that one of the interesting, if you look at the numbers, one of the interesting things is the huge number of young people in the Middle East. It's a very, very, very young region if you compare it to Europe or even America. And when you look forward, you look to in the next 5 years, 10 years, when those young people will go to the job market, you see that they have very, very few opportunities. And this can become also not only domestically something that destabilizes governments, but also something that turns out into immigration crisis, national security crisis. What do you do with those young people?
First of all, you encourage them to stay. Going back to the 2002 report, 50% of young people said they wanted to immigrate. We have to keep them in their countries. They're the future. At the Wilson Center, we've done a considerable amount of work on workforce planning, and we've looked at some of the desynchronization of what is being taught in the universities, what the private sector needs, what the private sector will offer young workers versus what they expect. And these are all fixable problems. We've done a good job in other areas, including in our own country to some degree. We still need to do more. But there are ways, and here again, I point to the many participants in Concordia with experience around the world in all of these developmental issues. The United States can play a big role in that, but it also has a big role, and it's unique to the United States, of helping preserve the security infrastructure that provides the platform for any kind of long-term development.
So now let's talk about the US, because there's this, always popular question that is being asked for the last 20 years. Is the US disengaging from the Middle East?
Well, we just had Jared Kushner in this hall before me talking about the Abraham Accords, which are a dramatic indicator of how the United States can work through partners and allies in the region, Israel and Arab states, and advance security as well as diplomatic, and what we're hoping for, and he's an expert and an advocate of that, cultural, economic, social intercourse between the populations. And the United States, I would say, what it's disengaging from, and I'm poster boy for what we were doing, was we've disengaged from trying to remake the societies and governments and peoples of the region by force with armies. We're not going to do that anymore. But that's not disengaging from the region diplomatically. It isn't even disengagement from the region militarily to deal with threats such as the Islamic State, where by, with, and through we were uniquely capable of leading the international effort to put them down. Same with containing Iran.
But I think it's, there's this contradiction, because when you ask, I think, the average American, he would tell you, yeah, why should we be in the Middle East? Who cares about the Middle East? When you ask people in the region, they say, oh my God, the US is leaving, you don't care about us anymore. And is it even possible to bridge this divide?
It is, but first of all, people in East Asia ask that. People up until February in Eastern Europe are asking that. That's the problem of a collective security system that is dependent upon, as its major actor, somebody who is, depending on where you are, somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 or 12,000 miles away. And my answer is to the Americans who say, well, why do we have to be in the Middle East? I will say, if you don't go to the Middle East, it comes to you like on 9/11. Think of rogue countries with nuclear weapons and chemical weapons, as we've seen used by Assad in Syria. Think of the crucial need under the current circumstances of oil and gas flows, not just in Ukraine, but to keep the global economy humming under these difficult circumstances. Who do we turn to? The answer, as we saw in Joe Biden's trip to Israel and Saudi Arabia, is we turn to our friends in the region. So that's my answer to Americans.
And what's your answer to people in the region that still, after Biden's trip, still say, oh, the US is leaving?
We're not leaving. The US military is still there. Our defense commitments are there. But more importantly, there is recognition among most people, be it the Trump administration, as you just heard, be it the Biden administration, be it the Obama administration before and on back, ever since Franklin Delano Roosevelt met the King of Saudi Arabia, that this region is important to us and we cannot abandon it. We will structure it differently. As I said, we're out of the nation building business, but we are not out of the regional security business.
And, you know, if we're talking about, again, empowerment in the Middle East, a lot of it is about the, you know, the need for democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when you say to people in America, democracy in the Middle East, they start getting the jitters. Because last time people spoke about democracy in the Middle East, it ended up not very well. But still, this is one of the main problems. So how do you tackle this thing without people starting to think that you want to, you know, send the U.S. military back for state building in the Middle East?
Barak, this is a tough one. I would say, first of all, neither the United States nor the rest of us in this conference can bring democracy to the Middle East. The people of the region will develop it just like we did in the 18th century in the United States. But they need certain things to go through this process. The first is a secure platform. The next thing is the soft power of the international community, and I have never seen soft power in all of its manifest ways and colors and flavors than here at this conference. It involves international health. It involves the UN specialized agencies, humanitarian NGOs, the private sector, particularly investment firms, the energy sector, and on and on. These people together can work with the societies and governments of these states for a better future, and the best way to have a better future that doesn't turn into tyranny or disaster, as we're seeing with COVID in China or war in Russia, is to have governments that are accountable to their people. And that means democracy. And that's a lesson that while I believe in that, I'm not here, I'm certainly not in the field anymore, at least to try to push that on people, but rather to simply leave it for them to decide, because they will decide one way or the other.
Yeah, but, you know, it's not that simple that people decide. Like, look at, you know, Tunisia, which was the country that we all thought that it was the example, you know, where the Arab Spring started. It was, you know, the example of how people can kick out the dictator and rebuild their society and rebuild democratic institutions. And look where it is now with this regression and with the US government more or less doing nothing about it.
Well, doing nothing implies that there's a switch somewhere in the basement of the State Department. It says Tunisia.
There's
democracy,
not. There's not.
Press this button. Ignore, press that button. We're just not that good. What I will say is democracy isn't a steady path. One of the most democratic systems in Europe in the first half of the 20th century was Weimar Germany, and look what happened to that democracy, but look where Germany is today. It's an unsteady and rocky road to embrace democratic values. We have seen this in our own country recently, and we're a pretty old democracy, so I'm optimistic.
Yeah. We have 30 seconds left, and I want you to try and, again, tell our audience what's the one takeaway you want them to take from this panel about what needs to be done in the Middle East.
If you are an American with any influence on the American government, press your leaders to remain engaged in the Middle East militarily, diplomatically, with assistance and others. If, like most people here, you are involved in humanitarian, cultural, health, economic, and other efforts, realize that you are the soft power without which hard power is not going to do anything but simply be in a revolving crisis of war after war. Nowhere is that more obvious than the Middle East. We can together fix this.
Ambassador Jim Jeffrey, thank you very much. Thank our audience. Thank you.